you touched on something earlier in our conversation that I'd love to come back to, which is the game of schooling. And we're still on the same vein of education, but I'd love, what was when you were looking at it and when you were in it versus in it and out of it as you transitioned, and then now you were looking out and now you're back in it. Like, what was this game that you saw, and then how have you maybe changed the rules in the new schooling environment that you're building?
Yeah, so the game, I love that. The game, it's really a religious belief that has been thrust upon us. And so there is this religious, cultural, religious adherence to keeping school looking like the way it looks. Academia is king. You have to do certain things at certain times. Everybody grouped together with as many other kids your age as possible. All of You got to go to college because that's what's going to set you up for success. There's so many of these things that are actually the antithesis of human development, the antithesis of real education that's experiential versus having somebody, who's the sage on the stage. There are so many things that are completely outside of how humans have always, whether you think it's you evolved this way or whether you think you've been designed this way, how humans have always operated. We've gone a complete 180, but we've done it for long enough where now what is familiar is confused with what is true, right? People are familiar with that, so they believe it's true. And so what I saw was the very clear separation between familiarity and truth. I saw a lot of young people that I got to work with at Stanford who were extraordinarily academically talented. And then organizations were like, this guy sucked, though, when he came to work, like he sucked. And then I saw it when I was working with him. I'm like, okay, that's great. He's got his OChem book and he can tell me, like, man, he'll pass that test. I don't even know what he's talking about. Like, dude, like, that's fantastic. But he's miserable. I'm really happy. And he can't talk to other human beings. I'll talk to anybody. He hates his life. I really like mine. He just asked me how to write a check. And hey, what? Like, that's not hard. So I started to see some of those, again, those patterns of separation. And then I started seeing the game itself at the university. I grew up thinking you want to go to a quote unquote, first I grew up thinking there were quote unquote elite schools, right? That's not true. So like they're not that's a whole nother conversation. But the application process, well, of course it's a meritocracy. You get your good grades, you get your high SAT scores, and that's what, and you do your extracurriculars, and that's what can get you into college. Well, that's not necessarily the case. There's a whole lot of other layers and levels to that whole thing. So, seeing the game there, going into public school, seeing like, hey, I see what this young man needs. He needs some mentorship. He needs some guidance. He needs to not be selling drugs after school. He needs to not be tempted to join this gang. He needs to, and it's like, no, no, no. He needs algebra. What? That's not what he needs. That's not what he needs. School says he needs that. Education says this is how he's going to grow, right? And then you go into the public administration, and it's like, okay, this is what this community needs, and this is how we bring everybody together. And it's like, no, 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 we need funding, and you need funding by passing these tests, and you need. So there is just an overwhelming disconnect between what people need to grow and what school sets them up to do. They're two different games. It would be like me telling you to play soccer for 18, 20 years of your life and then getting done and be like, sweet man, you ready for your soccer test? And you're like, yes. And I'm like, cool, here's a chessboard. You're like, what? I'm like, yeah, it's a game. It's a game, right? That was a game. This is a game. Same thing, right? No, it's not the freaking same thing. It's not the same thing. School's not the same thing as life either. And it's pretty obvious, but it doesn't matter that it's obvious because it's so ingrained in us as a religion of what everybody needs to do. That's what we're battling against.
Really? Yeah, man. Yeah, it's so interesting. Like, it's obvious, but it's so ingrained. You know what I mean?
It's
It's like when
obvious,
you
but we
look
don't
at it and
care.
you have a conversation, and then we go back to our life. Like, you could have a I can imagine two people having this conversation, like agree, 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 and then they just go back and
Uh-huh.
do the same thing. They go back and play soccer again, and it's like,
Bingo. Words are what
yeah,
they wish they believe. Actions are what they actually believe.
yeah, man.
Or are too afraid, so they just live in the lie. Right? So maybe that I'll have conversations with people who will logically go, "Oh my God, yeah, you're right. Okay, yep, you're right." But it's more comfortable to live the lie than it is to ask more questions and to dive into the truth. Because what happens is if I start to actually dive into the truth and want to live according to the truth, well, it's not familiar to other people and it's very uncomfortable for them. So it's like, wait, what if I decided to homeschool my kid? What if I decided to home educate my kids? Ooh, my mom is really going to give me some grief because she's going to think that like I'm not doing things right. She's really going to the people next door are going to think I'm a really bad parent. I remember growing up thinking homeschool kids are all weird, so I'm going to be what if my oh man, my kids are going to be are they going to be weird? Oh, that's going to really piss off my wife. Oh god, that's really going to and because all of those strings are too, like, they don't want those to unravel, it's like, oh, I'll just live in the lie. I'll live in the lie. Forget I ever even thought it. I'm going to live in the lie. I'm sure they'll turn out fine.